like for like a Twitter API, if you put them in another file, then when you like push it to GitHub, you can make sure that that one doesn't get pushed. So that's another reason to use it as well.
Yeah, you'll see if you look at more complicated code, you'll see tons and tons of files that tend to be small-ish. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that it's easier to think about code that's small than to think about one file that has a million functions in it. Right? It's sort of easier to do that. Cool. Any other questions? All right. So there might be a lot of questions on this stuff that we did last time. If there are specifics, we can talk about it later. But I wanted to change. I wanted to do what I just said earlier, which is like kind of take a step back and talk more specifically about like fundamental JavaScript stuff. Specifically, objects and object-oriented programming. It's probably a phrase that you guys have heard before. And if it's still mysterious, hopefully this will sort of like peel back some of that mystery. So I'm going to quit this guy, go back to part 3 of our thing. So another thing I want to show that I might have glossed over, the way that JavaScript and HTML work together is that you know that HTML is the stuff that renders onto a web page, right? Like that's your paragraph tags and your header tags that have the text or images, whatever. It also is how you reference JavaScript files. So in my HTML file, I have this thing, script, and I give it, it's a script tag, right? It has an opening tag and then a closing tag, script. And it's a little bigger. And I give it the name, in source, I give it the name of my JavaScript file, which I have over here as oop.js. Okay, and that's how you reference them in an HTML file. Keep it separate from the server stuff. This is not server side, this is client side. So client side, you reference stuff in your HTML files. Server side, you use Node with the require function to reference stuff server side. Okay, you want to keep those two things like separate in your brain because they're two fundamentally different things. So we have our oop.js file. So we're going to go into it, and we have a blank file that just has console.log. I just want to make sure that it's working. The other thing I'll show you quickly is how to start a server so that you can serve up that file without using Express like we did last time. This is just a really simple way to do it through a command line program rather than using a separate library. So I'm in the folder that has my code, that has my index.html file right here. And what I'm going to do is type http-server-p and give it a port number. A lot of times people use 8080, you could use 3000, you can use whatever you want as long as it's 4 digits. I mean, it doesn't have to be 4 digits, but typically it's 4 digits. I'll just use 1, 2, 3, 4. If you run this command and it says you don't have HTTP server, you might have to do this, npm install -g HTTP server. It's actually a program that you're downloading using npm like we talked about last time. Remember,
you should do that anyways.
If you want, you don't have to. I would say, I would do this just so you have it, npm install -g HTTP server, and then you'll never have to do this again. Remember, npm is a package manager, so it's used to download libraries. It downloads other people's JavaScript code.
Sorry, what is
npm? npm is just a package manager that is used to keep track of all of the software that you've downloaded that are JavaScript files. So when you do npm install, it's literally downloading files and it's putting them on your computer. The -g is a specific thing that just says globally, so you can use it from anywhere. So once you have HTTP server and you're in your directory with your HTML file, that's when you type http-server-p and then whatever port you want. I'll do 8080 actually. And you hit enter and you'll say, hey, look, starting up HTTP server, serving // That means I'm serving the directory that I'm in. In command line language, // is the directory that I'm in right now. Okay? You'll sometimes see .. That means the directory back one. But 1 ... means this one. Okay? So that's what it's telling me, that it's serving the current directory on this website. So if I copy that and I go to my browser and I go to localhost 8080 or 127, you can also do, this also is localhost. Tells me you can't find a favicon, that's fine. You see it logged high, so it's working. And let's clear the console. This is just a JavaScript console. I got to it, remember. You go to a web page, right-click, and go to inspect. So, all right. So now we got that out of the way. Let's talk about objects. Actually, let's start in here. Console. So I told you that a while ago, I said it a couple times, that everything in JavaScript is an object. And you guys have seen objects before, the things with the curly braces, right? But JavaScript pretty much treats everything like an object. I'm lying to you a tiny bit, but only like a tiny bit. It's mostly everything as an object. So if I say x equals 3, what do we know about objects? Objects have like properties and stuff on them and methods, right? So if I have like var obj is equal to, and I give it log, and it's just a function, whatever, right? Like I can have objects that have properties on them. Let's do whatever. This number has properties on it, right? Like it has stuff that I can call. It's a number, but I can like call methods on it, which is like weird because you think a number doesn't have, like it's just a number, but it's not actually just a number. It's a number that is wrapped in an object that has stuff that you can do to it, like has properties that you can call. So toFixed is a pretty simple one that just takes the number and adds decimal places to it. So 2 adds like 2 decimal points, 4 adds 4 decimal points. You'd never use toFixed really, it's just like an easy one to show. But it's still a number, right? I could also do this, x equals new number 3. It's the same, it's fundamentally the same thing. And the reason that this is, it just shows you explicitly that I'm creating a number object. So if I do x, check it out. Now I get this like weird number object thing that has a primitive value 3 and like some garbage here. So it's really just treating it like an object. The same thing is true with strings. You know, string is equal to hi, whatever. I could also do str is equal to new string hi, and then str is now the string object. Actually, this is kind of cool. So let me do a longer one, a really long string, and then let's log it. Let me move it up to the top. So this is a string object I created by doing this, right? New string. Look at this. This is kind of weird. It's storing every single character in my string as properties on this object, which is weird. So I could do, and it also has a length property. So I could do str. Let me get the third character, e. 3 is e. Right. So strings in JavaScript are actually just represented as basically objects where each character is its own property, and then you just access it by indexing through them, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks kind of like an array. It's sort of like an array. Arrays are actually the same, right? So if I do 1, 2, 3 as an array, see, it's just an array, 1, 2, 3, like what you expect. But, and I mean, I can also do it this way too. 1, 2, 3. And it's the same. But what if I did something like this? Var array is equal to an object where 1 or 0 is going to be 1. All right, let me write it just so it's not all numbers. 1 is 2, and 2 is 3. Now array is an object with 0 indices 0, 1, 2, 3. It's pretty similar to this. They're not exactly the same, but what JavaScript is actually doing is when you create an array, it's creating an object just like this and then adding some extra functionality to it. So under the hood of an array, it's just this. This is all there is. That's like the base of it. So you could index it just like you would an array. It doesn't have a length property because it's not, only arrays have length properties, but we could add one. We could just do array dot length is equal to 3, and now we have our length. Right, so it's just an object.
What if you did it incorrectly?
That would be on me, so it would be wrong, right? Like when JavaScript creates an array, whatever equals, you know, I'm not going to do that. 1, 2, 3. What it's doing is it's saying, okay, under the hood, what it's saying is, all right, so let's just create like some temp variable and call it, say, new object. And then it's saying A0 is equal to 1, A1 is equal to 2, A2 is equal to 3. And then it's running a function that calculates the length of it and it's saying a.length is equal to 3, and then it's giving you back that array. And then if I say like, equals 1, 2, 3, it goes through all these steps and then returns this a back to me. And it does a lot more than that. Like it adds all the methods that you need, and then it returns that to me, and then I have my array. Does that make sense? So it does all that stuff under the hood. But it's still returning basically an object. All right? So with that in mind, let's look at some objects. We know that objects look like this, right? And we have something is whatever. I'm not very good at coming up with variable names. Other thing is something else. We can have an array, and we'll give it 1, 2, 3. We can have other objects in objects, like I don't know, read, hi, speak. We'll give it a function that just console.log hi. Right? Simple object. You've all seen this before. You all know what this is, right? All right, so has anybody not heard the term object-oriented programming? Is that term new to anybody? Do you guys feel like you know what that is, or have you just heard it?
I don't know what to compare it to.
Okay, so object-oriented programming is basically, it's a programming style. Fundamentally, it's just sort of a style, and the reason that it's used is it's really, really good at imitating like real-world objects, or what we could imagine to be real-world objects. So let's say I'm creating like a car dealership, and I have a database full of cars, and I need to keep data about each one of those cars, like which it's unique to each car, right? Each car has a price, it has a make, it has a model, it has whatever. In that database, what I would do is have objects that represent cars, and then on each of those objects, I would put the specific information that needs to be there. And so object-oriented programming lets you do this in a way that doesn't require you to have to make every single individual car and set every single specific property and set every single function that you need on the object. So it's a way to organize your code such that you can create a ton of objects with very little effort and do it efficiently for the program. It uses up less memory, basically. So if I want to create basically a car factory, let's say I want to create a car factory. What do I want to do? I want to create a bunch of cars. So I'm going to do car, let's call it like a Honda, whatever. And I'm going to create an object, and I'm going to say make Honda model, I don't know cars, model 1, 2, 3, year 1998. And then I want like a Toyota, and I'm going to do make Toyota model whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4, year 2001. Right, and you can imagine I could keep doing this. I could do this for more and more cars. This gets super tedious super quickly. So the way that you get around this is you use object-oriented programming and a specific concept called inheritance. Now what inheritance means is that these objects get information from some parent object. So some parent object contains a lot of like boilerplate information, and then the children of it just like go up to that parent and say like, hey, give me this, hey, give me that, give me this, all that stuff. And then the specifics to each model or each car, there's only like a few specifics, whereas a lot of the stuff is shared. So object-oriented programming lets you do something like this. So instead of creating individual objects for everything, I'm going to say var car is equal to, I'll give it an object, and I'll say make, and we're not going to fill in any information yet, model, empty string, year, empty, we'll just say 0, and then let's give it some functions. So let's say like get, well, let's say this is a terrible function, drive. And you'll just say console.log driving. And then we'll give it another function called change year. We'll give it a number. And we'll do year, this this.year equals no. Does this confuse anybody, this keyword? You guys all know what this means? Okay, so this is a really annoying JavaScript thing that it's super confusing because it changes its meaning depending on where you put it. And people who have been writing JavaScript for years, like sometimes just like don't know what it is, and they're just like, fuck it, let me just log it and see what it is, and then I'll like figure it out from there. It's really annoying. And the reason it's really annoying, I'll show you in a second, is that it doesn't do what you think it should do. Like, it should do what you think, and then like it does other stuff. So let's just do that. Let's just log it, and we'll see what it is.
Is it basically just replacing car? It's the same car down here, basically.
Exactly. Right? It's doing car. But the reason that you need this is because it's going to change depending on who called it. So it's going to have a different parent depending on who called it. But we'll log it, and you'll see it'll point to car. Out here, let me log it again, actually, just so you can see it. And then we'll go back to our page, and we'll run it. Do I have an issue? No, okay. So I logged this, and it pointed to the window. If you guys remember what the window is the top level object that exists in the browser that holds everything. It holds everything in your web page. So everything you would ever need is in this gigantic object that no one ever looks at because like you're never going to use any of this stuff. I don't know what any of this stuff is. It's just like stuff that the browser needs. And so let's do car. And car.change year, we'll give it 10, whatever. And you'll see it logged this. This is the car, right? It's got make, model, year, and see it changed the year to 10. That's because this refers to car. So it says car.year. Okay, so I've made a car boilerplate. So now what I'd really like to do is be able to use this guy to make other cars without having to rewrite all this nonsense. So, I mean, what I'd really like to do is just be like var Honda is equal to car Honda. Like that would be the easiest, and I'll just make it. That's not going to work. That's what I want to do, and we'll get to that in a second. But so JavaScript has a weird way to do inheritance, which is that if you're familiar with object-oriented programming in other programming languages, it uses things called classes. And I won't go into too much detail about what a class is, but a class is not an object. A class is a special thing, and a class just acts as a template. It's not an object. You can't do stuff on a class. Like you can't call a class dot year. That wouldn't work because a class is not an object. The class does not have a property year. In JavaScript, inheritance happens through objects. There are no classes. You'll see it's even more confusing that they did this, but there's a new round of JavaScript that has been approved in 2015. It's called, you'll sometimes say ES6, ES 2015. It's basically new JavaScript syntax. And they introduced a class keyword. So you could do like car, and then it like extends machine, and then it has like this constructor thing. This is fake. This is a fake thing. It's called syntactic sugar. It's a way of writing code that then converts it to something else. And the reason they did this is because most programmers come from languages that have classes, and JavaScript doesn't. So they were like, we're offering you an olive branch. Like, here's a way for you to pretend like you're coding in another language, even though you're writing JavaScript. So it makes it confusing because it's not a class. It's still going to create an object. It's going to be an object. It's not going to be a class. If that distinction like doesn't quite make sense, don't worry about it. Just know that there are no classes in JavaScript. That's what's important to remember, and that inheritance happens between objects. So you have an object over here that we're calling car. We have an object over here that we'll call Honda. Honda is going to take stuff from car. It's going to say, hey, you car, give me your function of drive. Give me your drive function. Give me your change year function. Okay. So let's get rid of this. Let's go down here. All right, so the way that this works, or one way that you'll see it sometimes, is this function called object.create. And what this does is I give it the object that I want to create a new version of. So when I give it car, what it's basically going to do is, not exactly, but it's fundamentally going to copy car and then dump it into a new object. So we'll say var Honda is equal to object.create car. And then let's console.log Honda. Okay, and we'll go over here, and we see our Honda object. There's nothing on it. But then if you look in this weird proto thing, which I'll talk about in a bit, but for right now, just bear with me. You'll see here's where all my stuff is. I have my make, my model, my year, I have drive, I have change year. So if I want to set specifics for the Honda, I have to do Honda dot set its model, right? Equals Honda. I have to do Honda dot make equals to 1, 2, 3. Now if I log it, you'll see Honda model make, and I still have all this stuff. So see how make is here twice, model is here twice. This is going to override this. This has a higher precedence value, if you want to call it that, than this does. So when I call Honda.make, I'm going to get 1, 2, 3. I'm not going to get this empty string down here. Okay. And so you see, note, just keep in the back of your mind that this stuff's here twice. Just take note of that. Let's do another one. So Toyota is equal to object.create car. And then we'll do Toyota.model is equal to Toyota. Toyota.make is equal to, I think that's a Toyota car. RAV4, we'll refresh. I can just call Toyota. All right, so we got Toyota RAV4. All right, so the way that you might think to do this, you're like, if you didn't know about this object.create, you might, say var Honda, and I'm sure some of you might have done this. A lot of people do this when they're first learning about JavaScript and objects. Is they'll be like, all right, I want a car, but I want it to have different things than this. So I'm just gonna copy all this stuff. I'm gonna go down here. I'm gonna say Honda. I'm gonna it's gonna have its drive function. It's gonna have its make, whatever. And then you do it again, and then you call it Toyota, and you change all this stuff. And if I do it this way, I just want to show you something in particular about this. Let me just comment this stuff out for a second. All right, so I have two objects that are different. So you guys know about the equality operator, right? Right, 3 is equal to 3 is true, 3 is equal to 1 is false. Turns out that this equality operator also works with objects. So if I have our OB, well, I can just show you here. So we know that Toyota does not equal Honda. They're two different objects, so that's what you would expect. What if I do this? Honda equals Toyota. I'm resetting Honda and Toyota, and now Honda equals Toyota. True, makes sense, right? That's pretty obvious. That's how you think it should work. But if I have all the same stuff here, so Honda 1, 2, 3, driving this year, no, these objects now have exactly the same content. Inside, they're exactly the same. But if I come back here and do this comparison again, they're false, right? So what that tells you is that they have the same information, but they're stored in two different things. Seems obvious, right? The same is true for functions. If I have function, drive, and then I have another function drive again, if all they do is log drive, all they do is log drive, they're fundamentally the same function. But if I compare them, they're different functions. So they're stored in two different spots in memory, even though they do the same thing. So the reason this is important is let's look at, how do I close this? Yeah, okay. Sorry, that's just the error window pops out. So if we look at Honda and Toyota, we know they're two different objects. And we know that Honda has something called drive, has a function called drive, and Toyota has a function called drive. And they're two different functions, even though they do the same thing. Now imagine I'm making 1 million cars. They're all going to have the same function drive, and they're all going to be different functions, which means that my program is now taking up significantly more memory because each object has a copy of a function that does the exact same thing as all the other objects, right? So that's like a massive waste of memory. So it would be great if we could figure out a way to have them share the things that they have in common. So every car has a drive function. So every car should share the same drive function. All right, this way doesn't do it for us. So let's go down here. Let's get rid of this stuff. So now I'll probably get into the stuff that you have seen before. Let's get rid of this. Actually, wait, no, I want to keep that stuff around. Let's get rid of this. Sorry, this stuff, this stuff. We'll keep this stuff around. So you guys have probably seen this kind of a thing, right? Have you seen that pattern before? New, whatever? So this is one way to get around that issue of sharing things that we just talked about. So this is just a function, right? Just a regular old function. It's just like any other function. I can log stuff in it. I can do math in it. X plus y, it's just a function. So let me call car. And this is another thing that's not fun about JavaScript. Oh, it just returned it, so I have to console.log it. 7. Really fun. But if I change this, and I add the new keyword, what this is now telling JavaScript is to treat this function as a very, very special thing. It's saying it's no longer just a regular old function. We're going to treat it as this thing called a constructor function. And what that means is that it's going to treat it as a factory for new objects. So it's going to return to you a new object that has this thing as a template. This is as close to a class as you're going to get in JavaScript, even though it's not a class, it's a function. And it's a function that you can still use as a function. So it uses this syntax where you have this on it, right? So this dot make is equal to, we'll just leave it empty. Sorry, a semicolon. This dot model is equal to empty. And if we console.log this, well, yeah, we should log the new car. So it logs 2 objects. Oh, yeah, it logs the object, and then it logs this, which is also the same object, right? So when you say this, you're just like adding a property to the car thing.
What would have happened if you didn't have this?
I will show you. I would need var here. Let's run it. Gives me a car object, but there's nothing on it. It's empty. Right? Because this in here refers to this. It's weird. It doesn't actually refer to this specific car. It refers to the object that is created and returned here. So basically what this is doing is it's saying var return object. It's giving it an empty object. It's creating an empty object, and it's saying return object dot make is equal to empty string. Return object dot model is equal to empty string, and then it's returning the return object. Now, if we don't invoke it, if we invoke it with the new, you'll see it will give us back this object. But in this case, you don't need the new keyword, because all we're doing in this function, we're making an empty object, we're adding some stuff to it, and we're returning it. So car gives us a new object. And this is why if you look at the new keyword on the internet, you'll see a lot of people are just like kind of bash on it, because you don't need the new keyword. Like you can mimic the behavior of using new with just a regular old function that makes an object, puts some stuff on the object, and gives that object back to you. And to me, it makes a lot more sense this way. Like this is a lot cleaner to me, just because like I understand it. Like I'm going in the function, making a thing, returning the thing. New sort of like confuses things. So like why is that there and what is it doing? It's sort of magic.
Wait, are local variables never declared in functions? I feel like I've seen that before.
Local variables are declared in functions. So if I declare a variable in here, like if I try and use return object out here, right? I've only defined it up here, inside the object, or inside the function. And then if I try and do it, it's going to say, hey, I don't know what that is, because you never defined it, because it's only defined inside here.
So when do you use var instead of this?
See, this is where it gets tricky, right? So this only gets used when you call it with the keyword new. And that's why I think this is clearer, because when you call something with new, what this is basically doing is saying, all right, I'm going to make this variable called this, and I'm going to set it in equal to an empty object. And then I'm going to say this.make, this.model. Now it does this step for you, but that's basically what it's doing. But it just does it under the hood.
So you would only see this when it's
Exactly. Not exactly. You might see it inside other functions, but we'll get to that. So for right now, let's get rid of this return. Also, if you use a constructor function and you return something that's not, like if you return something else, if I return like 4 and I call new car, whoops, I gotta get rid of this guy. Oh, I guess that worked. I didn't get the value though. Like I returned 4, but it didn't give it to me. So like you can't return stuff out of a constructor function because it's going to return the object to you. So everything happens now on this like object called this. All right, and then I could do the same thing. This dot drive is equal to a function where I'm just going to log drive, and we'll do this dot, I guess like set year. Now, if you're wondering why I'm creating a set year function when I could just like set it here, because I don't have anything better to do. Like there's no reason I would call this, because I could just do like car.year equals. It's just an easy function to make. And I'll just do, and it shows you that you can use this inside of a function. So this dot year is equal to, let's not call this year, call it n, is equal to n. All right, unexpected token, what's the problem? Because I didn't do that right. Okay. All right, let's go back here. We have our car. We now have our set year function and our drive function. Let me not just log it. Let me do var c is equal to new car. We get c.year, whatever, c.set year, and we'll give it 10, and then c, year is 10, right? Makes sense. So if I now do var c2 is equal to new car, I give it another new car, c2, c equals c2, they're different objects, but c.setYear, 2.setYear, those are also different functions. So we didn't solve that problem. That problem was not solved. It's still here. We're still making a version of that function for every single object we create. So that's where this weird thing in here comes in, this proto. Have you heard the term prototype before? The prototype, as we mentioned before in terms of inheritance, the prototype is just an object that other objects inherit from. Does that make sense? So this thing that we did up here, this where we created a car object, just a regular old object, and then we did object.car or object.create. That's creating a new version of that object, right? And then jumping it elsewhere. But there's no reason that like you couldn't have. Well, let me say it a different way. So the prototype basically acts as a shared object between all of the things you create with that constructor. Or you can even do it with this method as well, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. Actually, let me do it first, just because it's actually pretty straightforward. let's go back to the first way of creating objects. Let's get rid of that stuff. So we look here and we see proto. It's weird that Chrome gives it this dash dash underscore underscore proto underscore underscore. That's not actually what it's called. That's just what Chrome calls it, and I'm not sure why. But let's create a car prototype, and we're just going to make a function. And the things that this is where we put everything that we want things to be. We want the shared things. So every function that should be shared, we're going to put in our prototype. So it's just an object. And then we still have our regular car object. So all the stuff that's going to be specific to the car is in this car object. And all the stuff that's going to be shared between all cars is in this prototype object. So how do we link these things together? Well, object.create actually gives you a way to do this. And as the second argument, you just put in the prototype. And we could do it here. Car prototype. Let's see if this works. I think this is how you do it. So we have Honda and Toyota. Okay, that didn't work. Let's do it a clearer way. So what we're going to do is say car. Let me double check how to do this. Out of here, you. Oh no, where did you go? Oh, okay. So let's back up. Sorry guys, I'm jumping out of order here. Forget everything I just said. Let's go back to car. So I want to set its prototype. So I'm going to do it down here. I'm going to say car.prototype, and I'm going to give it an object. And here is where I'm going to set all the stuff that I want to be shared. So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to get my drive and my whatever functions, and I'm going to put it in here. Okay. So what I've done is I've set the prototype of this car constructor to be equal to some object, and we don't need these anymore. And these are going to be shared between the two cars, and you'll see that in a second. So we have C and C2. So we have make, model year, and prototype on proto. We have change year and drive. And then on proto, we have change year and drive. So now let's just confirm change year equals C2.change year true. So now they're the exact same function. And they will work independently of each other because they use the keyword this. And the reason that's important is when I call new car and set it equal to this object here, when I call C.drive, it's going to come in here. It's going to say, all right, you have a prototype that has a function called drive, or change year. You have a function called change year, and this is whoever called me. So C called change year, so this gets set to C, and that's a C.year. It does not affect C2, because C2 didn't call change year. Does that make sense? All right. Here's where the this keyword gets funny. If I have a function within a function, I don't know why I would have a function in my change year function, but you do see this pattern a lot in more complicated code. You'll see functions have other functions inside of them. And if I do something and I just console.log this inside of this function, so now whenever I call change year, it's going to log this. It's going to call that function, which is going to log this, and it's going to set the year. So let's refresh. We'll do C.change year. And look at what this is. This is the window. So it's no longer referring to the object. It's referring to the window. It's referring to like the main object. And this is what's really frustrating. because you would expect this to just stay the same, and it should stay the same. So a lot of the time what you'll see people do is annoying tricks like this. They'll say var self equals this, and whatever, it doesn't matter what you call this. You could call it me, you could say that. Self is a pretty common one, that is a pretty common one. And they'll change this to that. And what that's doing is I'm capturing a reference to this, which is the object.
Why is it not the document?
Because this is, so if I do it out here, if I log this out here outside of the function, then you'll see what
You
it,
put it inside and you log the document object, and you put it outside and it's not gonna log the object.
it doesn't make sense. I agree with you. It doesn't make sense, which is, it's frustrating. It doesn't make sense.
Where does it start?
So the rules for this are weird, and that's why I said earlier, like, if you don't know what it is, just log it, and then you can figure out how to deal with it, because it changes depending on the context. There actually is, because this is such an annoying problem, and the creators of JavaScript know that this is an annoying problem, they created ES6, the new version of JavaScript, has syntax to get around this. And what they did is create another version of a function. And it's called an arrow function, and it looks like this. And it's super weird. But if I console.log this, and then I should give it a name. We'll just call it log. So it equals this basically means a function that takes no arguments. I could also have args in here. But this is a function that has no arguments, and this little arrow thing is why it's called an arrow function. And then I have my curly braces for my function. So let's comment this out. Let's not call something. Let's just call log. And let's get rid of that one, so we're only logging it once. And we'll refresh. And we'll see dot change year, and you'll see now it logs car. Okay, so they fixed this in newer versions of JavaScript, but for a long time that didn't exist, and you had to do this annoying like that equals this trick and console.log that. So if you look at code that was written before 2015, chances are you'll see this pattern somewhere. It's pretty common, and so that's what it's doing. Don't get tripped on the fact that it's like just called that. It's kind of it's whatever you want. Some people call it me because it's like it's me, I'm the object, so I'm calling it me. Whatever. Okay, does that make sense? So you might be thinking, why would I ever want to use this stuff? Unless you've done some done some prototype-based things before in like P5. This pattern is really, really good for situations where you're making lots and lots of the same thing that have to behave very similarly but have independent states. So like in P5, let's say you're creating like a particle simulator, right? You'd have a class, you'd have an object called particle, and on the particle's prototype, you'd have move, and you'd have update, or whatever other functions that are going to be shared. And then on the particle itself, not on the prototype, on the particle itself, you would have its x position, its y position, its radius, its color, its whatever. And it doesn't really matter if you're only making 10 of them. Even if you're making 1,000 of them, it doesn't matter. But as soon as you're making like 10,000, 15,000 particles, if you are creating new functions every single time, you're taking up tons of memory, and you're going to see your browser slow down like crazy. Especially if someone's looking at it on their phone, which is like sort of memory limited compared to your computer. So that's what this pattern is super, super, super useful for.
And is that its only difference? I mean, it's a big difference.
Yeah, fundamentally, that's when this pattern is really helpful. Like this pattern up here, this object.create pattern I really like it just because it's really obvious what's going on. Like you have an object, you're making a version of that object, and then you're setting this to, it's more typing. Oh, the other thing I didn't mention is, this is annoying, right? That you have to write like honda.model, honda.make. So what I would really want to do is pass in stuff here and say make and model. And then I can do make and model, and I can even give it a year. Let's call these different things just so it's not confusing. So these don't have to be called the same thing. You will usually see them named the same, but they don't have to be. They can be whatever you want.
So what we got the first type and second, like just to remember different.
Yeah, to show you that this first way of doing it is to just make it really clear that the way that JavaScript does object creation is this way. It's objects giving information to other objects.
So how would you call that method? Like that way of doing it? Does it have a way? Or
Yeah,
just
it's
to search like
totally. So let me show you a.
That wasn't a constructor of a prototype?
No, this is not. You wouldn't call this a constructor. This like car situation here. Constructor specifically means this, right? So the way that you would mimic it in this pattern is I would give it some like init function, and that init function takes args make model year, and then I would say this dot make is equal to make, this dot model is equal to model, this dot year is equal to year. I would get rid of this stuff. And then when I create a new car, I don't have to set it here. I then just say honda.init Honda make, which was whatever, and then year is 1998. And then we'll look at that guy. Honda is year, Honda 123 1998, and it's got my init function, which is you can think of this as sort of a factory. So this is sort of a workaround with the fact that you can't pass arguments to an object. Like when you create an object literal, you can't pass it stuff. So this creates this is essentially a constructor function, but it's inside of the object. So it's really clear what's happening. To answer your question about like what it's called, there is this book which is probably way denser than you want, but it has all the information in it that you would need. It's called JavaScript Design Patterns, and it goes over pretty much every single way that you could structure your JavaScript code. And one of the reasons why people love but also hate JavaScript is because it doesn't strongly enforce a style on you, right? Like more common, like C++, Python. Python's a little bit better, but they impose a very specific structure on you. It's like, this is how your code is going to be written. You're going to it's object-oriented. It's classically object-oriented, meaning they use classes. And they have very specific ways of doing things. JavaScript doesn't have a way. It's just like kind of a free-for-all, which is why a lot of people like hate it, because they're just like this. There's like no, everyone's code is different. It's hard to decipher code you've never seen before, but it works just as well. And so this book here sort of gets at all the different ways there is to do stuff. And you'll see here we have JavaScript design patterns. You have constructor pattern. Let's look at the prototype pattern. So the prototype pattern shows you, all right, you have, this is the method we just did, the object.create method. You can keep going down, and here's where it passed in. This is what I was doing earlier, but for some reason it didn't work. It says object.create, it gives it the, oh, I think I did it backwards. You give it the prototype first, and then you give it the specifics, and that's how you can mimic the prototype pattern using this object.create. There's also this way, which I just showed you. There's an init function and a get model function, and then there's this other crazy stuff down here, which, let's walk through it. Basically what it says is a function vehicle that takes a model of a car. I'm just creating an empty function here. There's nothing in here, just an empty function. I'm setting its prototype to our vehicle prototype, which is just an object. We're then using the new keyword to create a new version of this, which is an empty constructor that has a prototype. We're then calling f.init, which calls this init function, giving it the model and returning that object. It's a super convoluted way of doing it, but it works. And so this is why people are like, what the fuck? Just like give me a single way to do it and I'll understand it. But there's like 8 different ways to do the same thing. And so this sort of like shows you the myriad different ways in which you can do it. If you're in for like, if you want to like challenge yourself, I would like go for it. Look at some of these things. They might be very confusing. A lot of these things confuse me. One of my favorite is actually, I use this all the time. It's called the revealing module pattern. And what it does is these are all ways to create objects, right? They're all basically object factories. And what this does is it gives you a module, which is an object factory. Get out of here. You set some just variables, you don't use the keyword this. In this paradigm, you basically never use the keyword this. You create some variables, you create some functions, and then you return an object with those properties set. So I have an object, just these guys, with the property set name that has my public set name. I have greeting public var, which is this guy up here, hey there. And then get name is public get name. And I'm returning this object. And so when I call this guy, don't worry about these like brackets at the front and the end. That's a weird thing that I don't want to go into right now. But basically what that's doing is it's defining the function and calling it right away. Like it's not waiting for you to call it explicitly. It's just like calling it as soon as it's defined. It's called an immediately invoked function expression, IIFE. Yeah. And so it's creating an object which is this stuff down here. Now the reason this is such a cool pattern is because you can have private stuff that is inaccessible from the outside, but is still exists on the inside. So you see how this has private variable and a name, Ben Cherry. No one from the outside you couldn't do like my revealing module dot private var, because it would say that doesn't exist. But what you would have to do is say my revealing module dot public get name, and it would call this private function, which would call console.log the private var, and it would say Ben Cherry. But there's no way for me to directly access this private var. I have to do it through these public functions that I define down here. So you can hide information inside something. If you have something that's important for the way that your module functions, but you don't want anybody changing it ever, you can hide it like this. You can say, this is like, I need this number to stay this way always, and I never want the user to change it. This is a way that you could do that, right? So, and this is, again, just like one of many ways to do it. So that was a long-winded answer to your question, but it directly speaks to like all the stuff we were talking about. So we're at 5:30. Are there any last questions? Did this make sense? Was it stuff you've seen before? Is it helpful?
What's a good beginner's resource on JavaScript?
This is probably the best one. Mozilla Developers Network, MDN. And it has a learning section, and you can say learning web development. And it says complete beginner start here, getting started with the web. It gives you introduction to HTML, introduction to CSS, JavaScript first steps, building blocks, cross-browser tag, and it gets even further. And what's also nice is that it actually gives you getting started with the web. It'll show you, where was that? Oh, here it is. It was how the web works. This is specifically how, like when you go to a browser and you type a web address, it sort of walks you through the process of, you have your client, your server, and the requests and responses go back and forth, and then there's, they even talk about some protocols. TCP/IP is the protocol that data flows over. DNS is the domain name system for looking up IP addresses from names. HTTP is how the HTML files transfer, and then you have like, so what happens exactly, right? And it like walks you through it. This site's great. This site's super, super great. If you ever are looking for a JavaScript question and you're just like something simple like array or like reverse an array JavaScript, MDN is usually the first or second or third result. MDN is the best. This one sucks, W3 Schools. This one's terrible. It'll tell you the answer, but it just like doesn't, it just tells you how to use it and it like doesn't give you any information about it. Whereas if you go to MDN, It gives you examples about how to use it as well. And like this is a really simple function, so it doesn't really matter, but it does give you like a description and like, you know, what it does. So. All right. Thanks, guys. I'll put some of the stuff online. There was more stuff I have notes for. I'll put that stuff up too. There's some stuff on functional programming as well, which can kind of break your mind a little bit.
Should I send them that video that I sent you?
Yeah, sure.
That's good.
Which we don't have time to get to, but there's a couple other things that I'll post and you can like look through if you want. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.